Software is like a building. Uh, just because it works does not mean it's good. Uh, you can put a building together, but if you don't have a good foundation or you didn't use good materials, the first windstorm will knock the house over. It's not a good house just because it works as a house. Software is essentially the same. Just because it works does not mean it's good. Let me give you an example. I had a client who had business, and in that business he needed to have user information. He needed to know product information that the users would buy, and he had to have order information. What orders did they place, when, where they're being delivered to, that sort of thing. So he created a database. He had some tables in it, and then he needed an interface. So he made a web interface. That web interface let you view user information, product information, and order information. It also let you create those and update that. So we could update user info, product info, and order info. But the problem is the person who designed it did not have an understanding of software architecture. Basically, they created single files that did one thing. These files would directly communicate with the database to do what they needed to do. So there would be a file for viewing user info or viewing an order. So they would put an order in, and that file would go with the database, pull out the orders, maybe pull out the user info for that order and display it on the screen so they could view it. And then updating would be another file. So that was all fine, working good, no problem. But then things started to change. The database needed to be expanded. There was more user info. They needed, instead of handling one address, they had to have multiple addresses. The order information changed. They added products over time, and those products got more complicated, different features. You could add colors, you can add different sizes, different options. Do you want 1-day delivery, 5-day delivery? This stuff was not thought about originally, but came about later. They had to add more tables. They had to add tables for different organizations. So maybe it wasn't a user who was buying, maybe it was a business. So they added more tables. And they added tables on top of tables to account for the information that they needed, obviously. This became a mess. It was a mess. And the web interface, they continued to use single files. And so all these updates, all these changes to the database needed to be reflected in all the previous files, plus they needed more files to do different things with the new data. Obviously, this slowed down their entire business, and they struggled to complete orders. They struggled to fix issues. They struggled to find issues. And so I was hired to, help with this process. And I looked at the code and I said, wow, this needs some big changes. Yeah. So what I did was, understanding software architecture. I was able to start dividing these things out. I didn't want to touch the database at this point, although updating would be good. But using the current database, I started designing actual functioning software with a software architecture with different components that did different things. One component would get user info, one component would get order info, there'd be another component that would use both things, and these things could be recalled and reused depending on what they needed to be used for. And this was a software system. I spent a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe longer. And I started designing the system. It started coming together, it started working, but the client didn't understand he's obviously paying me a significant amount of money, and what I ended up delivering was not different than what he had here. From the surface perspective, it functioned the same as before. His developer that he had working on the old once file system did not understand what I was doing here. The true benefit of this is in the future. And you constantly have to think about what's going to change. The software needs to adapt to different use cases. And that's what I do. That's what I can provide. So you don't get stuck into this mess. Updates and changes in the future should be smooth and should not take forever to do.